Bernadette Tobin, and I'm Director of the Plunkett Centre for Ethics, which is a joint centre of Australian Catholic University and St Vincent's in Sydney. Advanced care planning, the expression isn't to be found there in the code, but the idea is certainly there. It's there in the chapter on end-of-life care. But before I go directly to this very important notion of advanced care planning, I'd like to say two things as preliminaries, which I think help us to understand the importance of advanced care planning. The first is this, that in the code we explain and clarify that very old tradition in the Catholic Christian Church of the right of the individual to forego futile or overly burdensome treatment. Now, of course, we're taught that our lives are a precious gift from God, a gift that we should take proper care of, and therefore, of course, suicide or euthanasia are out of the question. But it's also the case that in taking proper care of this precious gift, we don't have to accept treatment that we judge to be futile or overly burdensome. Now, a treatment that's futile just means it's a treatment that won't work. And of course, as soon as you say that, it's very important then to say, well, what do you mean won't work? That forces you to think, well, what's the point of a medical treatment? And the point of a medical treatment might be one of a number of things. It might be to cure someone of a disease. It might be to stabilise a person in a reasonably satisfactory condition. It might be to relieve the symptoms of illness. It might be to help the person die as well as possible. So the point of a medical treatment might be any of those, and perhaps there are other objectives. And then to say of a treatment, it won't work, means it won't fulfill that objective. It won't enable me to reach that objective. It's just not going to stabilise me in a reasonably satisfactory condition. It's not going to cure my condition. It's not going to relieve my symptoms. People think that the notion of futility is difficult. It's not. It's very clear, very simple, very straightforward. So in our tradition, I, as an individual, may of course refuse a treatment I judge to be futile, and I may refuse a treatment that I judge to be overly burdensome. That is, it'll do some good. It may be curative, it may be stabilising, it may relieve symptoms or whatever, but in providing those benefits, or one of those benefits to me, it might do so in a way that's too burdensome for me. It might mean that I have to stay in hospital when I really want to get home. It might mean that I'm isolated from my family when I really want to be with them. It might mean that the side effects of the treatment are too onerous for me. So the foregoability of treatments that I judge to be futile or overly burdensome is a very old principle in our tradition. So that's the first thing, and those ideas are explained very clearly in the code. And the critical thing is that it's the judgment of the patient which is central. And of course, therefore, patients need to rely on good advice from healthcare professionals. But the other preliminary point is this, that today, in 2015, it's very likely that when I need to make those judgments as a sick person, as an old person, as a frail person, just as an ordinary human being who is going to die, when I'm likely to need to make those judgments, when I'm likely to need to be able to talk over these matters with my doctor, the likelihood is that I won't be able to do so, that I simply will have lost the capacity to think and to talk and to communicate with the doctor. That's the likelihood, that I will be in hospital unable to have that conversation, and thus my doctor will be unable to have that conversation with me. She won't be able to collaborate with me because I won't be up for the conversation. Now, if in 2015 I know that's a likelihood, I now need to do something in advance about it. So in the light of those two preliminary points, I think we can understand why advance care planning, planning for my care in advance, is such an important, well, our code says such an important right of mine. I now think actually it would be better to say such an important responsibility of mine. Because if I know that my doctor is likely to be unable to talk to me, that she's going to have to talk to someone else, and if I know in advance that someone else is going to find it hard, I should be doing something about that now. The first thing I should be doing is having a think about who I'd like the doctor to talk to, who am I going to load this responsibility on, and then I should give that person a bit of help. Now, if I'm an unusual person, it may be that I don't need to talk to that person. Maybe I can trust that that person will be able to make wise decisions with my doctor without any advice from me. But mostly that's not the case. So what I should be doing, just as an ordinary human being who's going to die at some stage, and for whom the likelihood is that I won't be able to have the conversation with the doctor myself, she won't be able to talk to me, I need to work out who I'd like her to talk to, that one person, perhaps it's two people, and then I need to give that one person or those couple of people some help. And that's why Catholic Health Australia has put so much work into drafting some documents that prompt me to think about these things and think about what kinds of help I can give that person. So if we now think of advanced care planning from the point of view of a healthcare practitioner, then we need to flip it. It's kind of the mirror image. The doctor or the nurse or the social worker or the psychiatrist or the counsellor or the pastoral care worker, that person needs to find out from the sick person or old person or frail person whether that kind of planning has been done in advance, and if it has, who's the person that the patient wants to speak on their behalf, and has that person been helped, and is that person now able to do the collaborative thinking and planning together with the healthcare professional. And as Catholic institutions, we should be encouraging our doctors, our nurses, our administrators to encourage people who come in to do that kind of planning. And I suppose that a last thing that's very important is that you can do this advanced care planning in broadly speaking, two different ways. You can do it in the way that I've just outlined. Have a think of the person you'd like the doctors to talk to and give that person some help. Or you can get a piece of paper and write down some things. I'd like this, I wouldn't like that. Now, in Catholic Health Australia, we have always argued that the former is a better instrument for advanced care planning. The latter, the filling in of forms, the writing out of I never want this and I never want that and I'd always want this, is a much inferior way of doing advanced care planning. And there's a lot of literature on that subject, which shows, I think, conclusively that the written directives are largely a failure. So I think what we should be doing is encouraging people to anticipate this circumstance that's a likely occurrence, anticipate the doctor will want to talk to someone, a good doctor will want to talk to someone, and then anticipate that that person is likely to find it very hard indeed, and we should now give that person some help. It's important, I think, to understand what is the role of the patient's representative. Now, the patient's representative gets called by a whole variety of names, the substitute decision maker. There's a whole bunch of names there. I think I like the term the patient's representative because the word representative gets the role right. The role is to represent to the healthcare practitioner the person in the bed. This patient's representative has only got a role if the person in the bed is unable to speak for themselves. So the role of the patient's representative is to represent that person. And I think that this is generally speaking understood, but sometimes you hear loose talk which sounds as though it's not understood. So sometimes you hear doctors or nurses saying, well, I thought that the best thing to do for the patient would be X, but the family want Y, as though the family's wishes for themselves were somehow to be determinative. Now, so the role of the patient's representative is to represent a person who cannot present herself. And of course the doctor has to take into consideration the circumstances of the family and of significant others. Of course the doctor, in recommending what she thinks would be best for the sick person, ought to do so in a way which is sensitive to the patient's family and significant others. That ought to go without saying. But I think we need to correct the impression that the doctor can either do what she thinks would be best for the family, what she thinks would be best for the person in the bed, or what it is that the family want, as it were, for themselves. And sometimes, of course, families do want things for themselves. They want the patient, can't we hurry things up, please? You know, we've got busy lives to go back to. And sometimes families want things slowed down in a way that goes against the doctor's Hippocratic commitment to the care of the patient. So a good doctor needs to have a very clear sense of where her primary responsibilities are. They're the care of a sick or elderly or frail or dying person in the context of the family. Of course, the situation may arise that a sick or frail or elderly or dying person doesn't have someone who can speak on their behalf, hasn't appointed someone, or perhaps has appointed someone, but that person is no longer around. So sometimes healthcare practitioners or people who are in charge of nursing homes are challenged to make good, humane, wise decisions in the absence of any help from such a patient or resident representative. And I think that the best that they can do there is carefully to judge whether a possible intervention would be sufficiently therapeutic, whether the benefits it holds out are sufficient to continue to think of it, and then to think about whether it is likely to impose burdens which are such that, as it were, the burdens outweigh the benefits. So what the healthcare practitioner or nursing home practitioner needs to do is to make the best possible judgment they can about the futility or likely overburdensomeness of a proposed intervention. And all we can ask of them is that they do their best. They make the best judgment that they can. And all our judgments in life are fallible. Of course we can get things wrong, but the challenge is to do the best that they can.